Do we pass that cross unheeding, breathing no repentant vow? Though we see thee wounded, bleeding, see thy thorn encircled brow, yet thy sinless death hath brought us life, eternal peace and rest. Only what thy grace hath taught us calms a sinner's stormy breast. That verse from Savonarola's familiar hymn, man, it strikes me in the solar plex. Sometimes at this time of the year during the Lenten season, like you, I would have to admit there are times when I pass that cross unheeding, and it's the last thing I want to do. And one of the ways that you can deepen your appreciation of the extravagant dimensions of Christ's love for you, especially with his sacrifice on the cross, is to just stop and ask about the verbal stones being thrown at him from the base of the cross. Ask about the taunts and the jeers that were thrown his way. Isn't that ironic? You tap into the power of irony. See, irony sometimes is funny, sometimes it's bitter, but irony is at its best when it clarifies something. It brings great meaning to that which may seem mundane or has become too familiar to you over time. So, for example, this is what was said at the base of the cross. It's so perverted and so twisted because, of course, Jesus is dying, and who mocks a dying man? But Satan was behind this, you can be sure. And this is what they said. This is Matthew 27, 41 and 42. In the same way, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders mocked him. He saved others, they said, but he cannot save himself. Isn't that ironic? He saved others. Chad. Remember the cripple, the blind, the lame. The widow at Nain. You know, do not cry. 2 words to the mom, 8 words to the boy. Young man, I say to you, get up. And he did. He saved others, yeah, but he can't save himself. It's so ironic. It's ironic, first of all, because, can he save himself? Can he? Friends, he looks utterly powerless on that cross, like one from whom men hide their faces. When you looked at him with his slits, his face beaten, blinded by blood, flies all around the thorn of crowns, back open like a rack of ribs, you looked away from it. It was a horror to see him. He was mocked, he was taunted, he was beaten. He's a dying man. He looks utterly powerless, but he is, at one and the same time, transcendentally powerful. He is mind-numbingly mighty. Remember when they came to get him in the garden? Who is it you're looking for? Jesus of Nazareth. I am he. And immediately, all of them were pinned like a 195-pound wrestler took his opponent to the mat. All of them went down. And they only came up upon God's permission. And when the fisherman grabs his sword, Peter, watch out when the fisherman's got the sword. And he lops off a portion of Malchus's ear, and Jesus shakes his head, put the sword away. Those who live by the sword die by the sword, and Jesus heals it. And Jesus says, don't you know that with a whispered prayer, I could bring a legion of angels to my defense? That's 72,000. He could have brought him from the cross. Remember what he said to the storm? Be still. This is the one who hangs and is battered, bearing our sins on the cross. His can't save himself is the impotence of omnipotence imposed by love, one scholar says. He can save himself, but he cannot save himself, because if he saves himself, of course, he can't save you, and he can't save me. And he loves you too. He loved you too much. He loved me too much. Love hung him to that cross. The nails, in a certain sense, were completely irrelevant. He saved others, but he cannot save himself. Isn't that ironic? And when you see the irony of it, it underscores the love he had for us, to bear our sin, to give us his perfect record, lived actively and devotedly for us in everywhere for all 33 and a half years that he lived among us. To give us that record, to assure us our past is past and heaven is hope-filled, and he is with us in this life. He's the with us God. Yes, even when everyone else is panicking with coronavirus or the next threat from war or a tsunami or whatever it is, God is with us. Friends, he saved others, but he cannot save himself. It's so ironic. And when you see the irony of it, it underscores the depth of his love for us. Believe it or not, there's a picture of this in a book written by Mark Twain. Some of you are familiar with it. It's called A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. It's about a guy named Hank Morgan. He gets hit on the head, and somehow that takes him back in time to the medieval times, and he's in King Arthur's court, and he befriends King Arthur. And the Connecticut Yankee talks the king into dressing up in the garb of a peasant and walking among the common people so he can be a better ruler. And the results are laughable, like scenes out of Monty Python, because the king forgets that he's a king. I mean, he forgets that he's a king dressed up like a peasant. And he acts like a pompous king, even though he's dressed in peasant garb. So everybody thinks he's a complete loon. I mean, this guy is crazy, you know. But in this chapter called The Smallpox Hut, they come across this broken down poor hovel, and the husband of the family in that hovel, he has passed away. He's just died from smallpox. And in the midst of this coronavirus fear, you can imagine the fear in those days. And the daughter is in the loft of the hovel, and she's dying from smallpox too. So when this woman sees the Connecticut Yankee and this other peasant coming, she flies out the door and she says, "For the fear of God that visits those who are harmless with misery and death, be gone, tarry not here, fly away, we are under his curse," because of the pox. But the king's heart breaks with compassion, and the king says, "Please, let us come in and help you. You are sick or in trouble." And the Connecticut Yankee says to himself, "It was a desperate place for him to be. He might not make it out alive." But it was no use arguing with him. He would enter the hovel. And when he does, the mother asks the king, dressed in peasant garb, "Can you check on my daughter who's dying of smallpox in the loft?" Can you imagine? Surely he's going to contract it. But he disappears up the loft. And then he comes down out of the loft. And let me just read this to you. I know you're a mature listener, and you'll see it through. It'll be worth it. This is what Twain writes. "There was a slight noise from the direction of the dim corner where the ladder was. It was the king descending. I could see that he was bearing something in one arm and assisting himself with the other. He came forward into the light. Upon his breast lay a slender girl of 15. She was but half conscious. She was dying of smallpox. Here was heroism at its last and loftiest possibility, its utmost summit. This was challenging death in the open field, unarmed, with all the odds against the challenger, no reward set upon the contest, and no admiring world in silks and cloth of gold to gaze and applaud. He was great now, sublimely great. The rude statues of his ancestors in his palace should have an addition. I would see to that, and it would not be a mailed king in armor killing a giant or a dragon like the rest. It would be a king in commoner's garb, bearing death in his arms. Behold your king on the cross. Do we pass that cross unheeding, breathing no repentant vow? No, we don't, because we see on the cross one who did save others and can save himself, but he cannot because he loves you, dressed in commoner's garb, suffering for our sin, but nonetheless King of Kings and Lord of Lords, that we may be his and live with him forever. God bless your Lenten meditation through the trait of irony. Isn't that ironic? God bless you.